250 years disappear in the space of a single breath. And when you open your eyes again, every quiet certainty of modern life has vanished so completely that even the silence feels unfamiliar. Before this day is over, you will discover that comfort is not the natural state of human life, but a recent invention, and the question waiting for you is simple. How long would you last if every ordinary convenience suddenly ceased to exist? Take a moment to settle into your chair, let the outside world drift a little farther away, and allow your imagination to do what no machine ever could. As you listen, you are not studying history from a safe distance. You are stepping directly into it, one ordinary hour at a time, until the ordinary itself begins to feel astonishing. At first, you notice nothing except darkness. Yet this is not the soft darkness you know from a bedroom filled with hidden lights and quiet electronics. It is complete, almost tangible, wrapping itself around you so completely that your own breathing seems louder than the world beyond your reach. Gradually, other sounds emerge from the blackness. Someone nearby shifts against dry bedding. Another person exhales in slow rhythm. And somewhere in the room a child murmurs before falling silent again, leaving you with the strange realization that you are not alone even though you cannot clearly see another face. Without checking a clock, you already know morning is approaching. Life has trained your body to wake before sunrise so many times that time itself is measured by habit rather than numbers, and the coming day begins long before the first light reaches the horizon. You lie on a narrow wooden frame supporting a mattress that offers little softness and even less certainty. Every movement reminds you that the stuffing beneath you is uneven, while tiny disturbances hidden inside the bedding encourage you not to think too carefully about what shares your resting place through the night. Warmth does not belong to blankets alone. The people sleeping beside you provide just as much protection from the cold, and personal space is not something anyone expects because survival has always mattered more than privacy inside a modest colonial home. Would it feel comforting to sleep surrounded by family every night? Or would the absence of solitude become its own quiet burden after enough years? The answer is harder than it first appears, especially once you remember that almost nobody around you has ever experienced the luxury of sleeping alone. The room itself barely separates your family from the weather outside. A single opening admits a pale suggestion of daylight once morning arrives, but it does little to keep winter from creeping inside, and every slow breath escapes your mouth in a cloud that hangs briefly before fading into the cold air. You finally push aside the rough blanket and lower your feet toward the floor, only to discover that the cold reaches you instantly through the wooden boards below. Before the day has properly begun, your body has already been reminded that comfort is a privilege you have not yet invented. Your shoes are waiting somewhere in the darkness, exactly where you left them the night before, and finding them by touch has become second nature because there is rarely enough light to depend on your eyes. Once you pull them on, the stiff leather reminds you that comfort has never been part of their design, and before you have taken your first real step, you already know your feet will carry the weight of another exhausting day. You rise as quietly as possible, although silence is almost impossible inside a room shared by so many people. Someone turns over beneath a blanket, a baby stirs near the hearth, and across the room a familiar glow tells you that the fire has nearly surrendered during the night. Nothing else can happen before that fire returns to life. Food, warmth, light, and every ordinary task waiting outside all depend upon those fading embers, making this small circle of ash the true center of your entire world. You kneel before the hearth and gently feed the remaining coals with dry kindling collected for exactly this purpose. Thin threads of smoke curl upward before reluctant flames finally begin to answer, pushing the darkness back only a few inches at a time, as though daylight itself must first ask permission to enter. The smoke never behaves quite the way you hope it will. Some escapes through the chimney, but much of it lingers inside the room, filling the air with a familiar haze that settles into your clothes, your hair, and eventually your lungs, until you no longer notice what would overwhelm someone arriving from another century. Imagine breathing that air every single day of your life without ever questioning whether it was healthy. Would you recognize the slow damage being done, or would you simply accept every cough as another ordinary part of growing older? As the fire grows stronger, Enough light reaches the corners of the room to reveal the first task almost nobody enjoys discussing. Hidden nearby waits the household chamber pot, an object so ordinary that nobody gives it a second thought, yet so essential that every family depends upon it before stepping outside. There is little privacy in this moment because privacy itself belongs to another age. You do what must be done while those around you either continue sleeping or politely pretend not to notice, each person understanding that tomorrow the same routine will belong to someone else. Modern comforts have disappeared so completely that even the smallest daily habits follow different rules. Nothing is flushed away with the pull of a handle, nothing disappears at the press of a button, and every necessity leaves behind another task waiting patiently to be completed. The smell would be unforgettable for anyone visiting from the future. Yet for you, after years surrounded by the same mixture of smoke, damp clothing, animals, and human life, it has become almost invisible, not because it has faded, but because your senses have quietly adapted to the world they know. Outside, the darkness begins to soften. The first gray light slips through the window covering, announcing a sunrise still hidden beyond the horizon, while somewhere in the distance a rooster finally declares a morning your body had already anticipated long before its call. One sound awakens another until the countryside slowly assembles itself around you. A cow voices its impatience, dogs answer from neighboring farms, and thin columns of smoke begin rising into the cold air as other households perform exactly the same rituals that have already filled your own morning. You pull on the remaining layers of clothing, each piece chosen for necessity rather than comfort, knowing that the hours ahead will demand nearly every ounce of strength your body can provide. Long before breakfast reaches the table, the day has already asked more of you than many modern mornings require before noon. And yet something quietly remarkable hides beneath this difficult beginning. If every day demands so much effort simply to exist, what kinds of people does that struggle create? And what might you discover about yourself before this long day finally comes to an end? The fire has finally found its rhythm, and with every crackle the room becomes a little less hostile than it was only minutes ago. Your stomach answers with a low reminder that yesterday's evening meal is long gone, and whatever waits for breakfast must carry you through hours of relentless work before another chance to eat arrives. Your muscles complain the moment you begin moving, but nothing about that feels unusual anymore. The stiffness in your shoulders, the ache in your knees, and the dull pull across your back have become such constant companions that you rarely separate them from the simple act of being alive. Pain is not an interruption here. It is the background against which every ordinary day unfolds. You no longer ask whether something hurts, only whether it hurts enough to keep you from finishing the work that cannot be postponed. Even your teeth demand attention, though there is very little anyone can do for them. A sharp pulse runs through one side of your jaw whenever cold air slips inside your mouth, reminding you that a small discomfort today could become tomorrow's unbearable misery. Dental care in 1776 is less about preserving teeth than surviving the moment they fail. There are no gentle procedures, no quiet clinics, and no promise that relief will come without introducing an entirely different kind of suffering. If the pain becomes impossible to ignore, someone will eventually remove the tooth using little more than strength, metal tools, and your willingness to endure what follows. There will be no reliable way to numb the agony, and once the tooth is gone, the danger may not be over because infection often proves more frightening than the extraction itself. Would you still fear the dentist if the alternative meant simply living with unbearable pain until your body could no longer tolerate it? That question feels less hypothetical once you realize how many people in this century quietly carry damaged mouths through every ordinary day. The problems do not stop with your teeth. Small injuries remain with you far longer than they should. Cuts heal imperfectly, joints stiffen after years of labor, and illnesses often leave behind reminders that never completely disappear. A cough from last winter still lingers somewhere deep inside your chest, returning whenever the morning air grows especially cold. No one finds that remarkable because nearly everyone carries some lingering weakness earned through work, weather, or sickness that never fully released its grip. If your eyesight begins to fade, life simply adjusts around the limitation. Reading becomes harder, distant faces blur into uncertain shapes, and unless your family possesses unusual wealth, there is little reason to expect the world will ever become sharp again. For women, the burden is often even greater. Pregnancy, childbirth, recovery, and the expectation that life must continue almost immediately afterward create a cycle demanding extraordinary endurance from bodies that rarely receive enough time to heal completely. Childbirth itself remains one of the greatest uncertainties any family can face. Every new arrival brings joy, but it also carries quiet fear because everyone knows mothers who never recovered, infants who never reached their first birthday, and families forever changed by a single difficult night. Medicine exists, but certainty does not. Treatments often rely upon ideas passed from one generation to another, and although some genuinely help, others ask the body to survive the cure as much as the illness itself. People trust what experience has taught them because experience is often all they possess. A familiar herb, a carefully prepared remedy, or advice handed down through family may inspire as much confidence as the rare physician living many miles away. Not every traditional remedy is without value. Some plants ease pain, certain natural ingredients help wounds heal, and generations of careful observation preserve knowledge that future science will eventually explain, even though nobody living in this room understands the chemistry behind it. When serious illness arrives, however, there are limits no amount of determination can overcome. The family gathers quietly, prayers become more frequent, and hope often rests not in medicine alone but in faith, patience, and the belief that another sunrise may still arrive. Death is never treated as an impossible outcome because it has always lived close to everyday life. Every household remembers someone whose place at the table now sits empty, making survival feel less like an expectation and more like a blessing earned one ordinary morning at a time. Still, this morning belongs to the living. The room has grown brighter, the fire burns steadily once more, and your hunger has become impossible to ignore, drawing everyone toward the simple meal that must somehow provide enough strength for everything the day has yet to demand. Breakfast is already waiting, although calling it a feast would require a generous imagination. An iron pot hangs above the fire holding yesterday's coarse cornmeal, now firm from the night's cold, and someone stirs it slowly until the heat softens it enough to serve once again. You fill a simple wooden bowl because fine dishes belong to households with greater means than yours. The steam rising from the porridge promises warmth more than flavor, and after waking in a room chilled by November air, that alone feels like a small luxury. There is little ceremony around this meal. Everyone knows exactly why they are here, and every spoonful, or, if necessary, every bite taken with rough fingers, serves one purpose alone: gathering enough strength to face another demanding day. If you were expecting butter melting across fresh bread or a table covered with comforting choices, this century quickly corrects that assumption. Most mornings offer only what necessity can provide, and necessity rarely concerns itself with variety. The porridge is plain, thick, and filling enough to silence hunger without truly satisfying it. A pinch of salt improves everything if your family has managed to obtain some, while a little molasses transforms the meal into something almost memorable, though both remain precious enough to be used carefully. Even so, nobody complains. Complaining wastes energy, and food, however modest, is received with quiet gratitude because everyone understands the far less pleasant alternative of having nothing at all. One detail would probably surprise you more than the porridge itself. Instead of reaching for coffee or juice, many people begin the day with a mug of weak beer, not for celebration, but because it often proves safer than drinking untreated water. The drink contains very little alcohol, certainly not enough to cloud your thoughts, yet the brewing process makes it a dependable choice in a world where wells and streams can easily carry unseen dangers. Children drink it, adults drink it, and nobody thinks twice because survival matters far more than appearances. Would you ever imagine explaining to someone from your own time that beer was considered one of the safer breakfast beverages? Strange as it sounds, the logic becomes surprisingly clear once you step into a world that has never heard of bacteria or modern sanitation. Tea still exists, but recent political tensions have changed the way many families see it. What was once an ordinary comfort now carries uncomfortable associations, And some households quietly replace familiar habits with new ones simply because history has reached even the breakfast table. Coffee remains available only to those with greater wealth or easier access to imported goods. For most rural families, preparing it demands too much expense and too much effort to become part of everyday life, leaving simpler drinks to fill the morning cup instead. Bread appears whenever someone has found the time and fuel to bake it, though fresh loaves are far less common than you might imagine. Baking requires hours of preparation, careful management of the fire, and enough ingredients to justify the work. So many families bake only occasionally and make every loaf last as long as possible. By the end of the week, that bread has become dense enough to challenge even healthy teeth. It is often softened before eating because chewing yesterday's loaf can require almost as much determination as the labor waiting outside. Fresh fruit depends entirely upon the season. During warmer months, orchards and gardens reward patient work with welcome variety, but November asks families to rely instead upon whatever has already been preserved against the long winter ahead. Beans, dried corn, pickled vegetables, smoked foods, and carefully stored supplies now replace the abundance of summer. Every meal reminds you that successful harvests are measured not by celebration, but by how well they carry a household through the months when nothing new can grow. Meat rarely appears at this hour. Animals represent months of investment before they become food, and no sensible family wastes valuable resources unless necessity demands it, making breakfast a meal built more around endurance than indulgence. Around the rough table, conversation remains surprisingly quiet. Your father concentrates on the work ahead. Your mother balances the impossible rhythm of feeding children while preparing the household for another day, and everyone else eats with the understanding that the morning's real challenges have not even begun. The final bite disappears quickly. Hunger has retreated, though only temporarily, and the bowl returns to the table as clean as when it first arrived because nothing worth eating is ever left behind. Outside, daylight has fully claimed the sky. The chores are already waiting, and this modest breakfast has served its only purpose. It has bought you enough strength to begin earning tomorrow's meal. Getting dressed is not the quick routine you know from modern life. There is no wardrobe filled with choices designed for comfort or speed, only a small collection of garments that have been repaired, reused, and carefully preserved because replacing them is far more difficult than wearing them again. You did not sleep in separate night clothes that waited to be exchanged for daytime clothing. The linen garment already against your skin served as sleepwear through the night, and now becomes the first layer beneath everything else you will wear before stepping outside. That inner layer protects clothing that is far too valuable to wash often. Heavy wool, leather, and carefully sewn outer garments represent weeks of labor and precious materials, so keeping them clean begins with protecting them from your own skin rather than scrubbing them after every use. If you are a woman, another structured layer comes next, shaped not simply for appearance, but also for support throughout endless hours of physical work. It must be tightened carefully, and unless someone helps with the laces, finishing the task alone becomes almost impossible. If you are a man, the process is hardly simpler. Shirts disappear beneath fitted garments before heavier coats complete the outfit, while breeches are secured with ties or buttons that demand patience rather than convenience every single morning. Nothing fastens with a zipper because such a thing does not exist. Every knot must be tied by hand, every button guided through its place, and every loose fastening reminds you that dressing yourself requires far more time than simply deciding what to wear. Would your morning feel different if putting on your clothes demanded 20 careful minutes before the day's real work even began? Once every layer depends upon your own hands, or someone else's, you begin to understand why getting dressed was once a meaningful part of the day's labor. Buttons themselves are not as ordinary as you might expect. Many families rely instead on ties, hooks, or simple pins because finely crafted buttons require skilled workmanship and materials that cannot always be spared for everyday clothing. Color tells its own quiet story. Most garments surrounding you display muted shades born from natural fibers or repeated years of wear, while brighter fabrics remain uncommon because producing rich dyes requires resources available only to wealthier households. Even your stockings ask for attention before your shoes can finally be secured. They must be pulled carefully into place and held there with simple garters, a system that works well enough until hours of walking slowly encourage everything to slip out of place again. Then come the shoes, as unforgiving now as they were when you first climbed out of bed. Their stiff leather has learned the shape of your feet only reluctantly, offering little support and even less forgiveness as another long day stretches before you. Winter demands still more layers. A heavy outer cloak shields you from bitter winds, rough gloves protect hands already hardened by work, and a hat becomes almost as essential as the coat itself, preserving warmth that your body cannot afford to lose. Head coverings also carry social meaning beyond simple practicality. Going outdoors bareheaded attracts attention for reasons you would never expect, quietly suggesting poverty, carelessness, or behavior that respectable neighbors might question without ever saying so aloud. The entire routine reminds you that independence has different limits here. Many garments require another pair of hands to fasten correctly, turning something as ordinary as getting dressed into one more task shared within the household rather than accomplished alone. One small detail reveals another surprising difference between this century and your own. Women's clothing rarely includes sewn-in pockets, so personal belongings travel inside separate cloth pouches tied beneath outer skirts and reach through hidden openings in the fabric. Men enjoy pockets stitched directly into coats and breeches, giving them quicker access to tools, coins, or personal items without needing an additional layer concealed beneath their clothing. It is a practical difference that quietly shapes everyday life in ways few people stop to notice. At last, you are fully dressed. Linen, wool, leather, and carefully mended fabrics surround your body like a suit of everyday armor, heavy enough to remind you of its presence with every movement, yet dependable enough to carry you through whatever weather and labor this day intends to bring. You pause for only a heartbeat before stepping toward the door. The fire still crackles behind you. Voices fill the room as the household settles into its morning rhythm, and outside an entirely different challenge waits patiently, one your modern senses could never truly prepare for until the moment you breathe it in. The moment you pull the door open, the cold reaches you with a force that no insulated house has ever allowed you to experience. It slips beneath every layer of wool and linen, fills your lungs with sharp morning air, and reminds you that the weather is not something you simply observe. It is a constant companion shaping every decision you make. Outside, the farm is already awake. Thin ribbons of smoke drift above neighboring homes. A rooster calls from somewhere beyond the fence, and distant voices rise through the stillness as families across the countryside begin a routine almost identical to your own. There is no slow start to the morning here. The first hours of daylight are too valuable to waste because every minute lost now becomes another task waiting in the fading light of evening. Before thinking about fields or workshops, you must first care for the animals. They have waited through the long night without complaint, but hunger follows the sunrise as faithfully for them as it does for every member of your household. You cross the yard where yesterday's frost still clings to the ground, leaving each step with a faint crunch beneath your boots. Chickens scatter as you approach, already searching the earth for anything edible long before their own breakfast arrives. Their eggs are more than food. They are part of the family's security, collected carefully because every small contribution matters in a world where waste can quietly become tomorrow's hardship. The cows require attention next. Their warm breath rises into the cold air while they shift impatiently inside the barn, knowing by habit that milking comes before almost anything else the day demands. You settle onto a simple stool with a wooden bucket beneath your hands. The rhythm begins slowly, then steadies into a familiar pattern as milk strikes the sides of the pail with soft, repeated sounds that have greeted countless mornings long before yours. There are no machines to shorten this work. Every drop depends entirely upon patience, steady hands, and the willingness to repeat the same careful motion until the task is complete. Have you ever considered how much of your breakfast depends upon invisible machines working somewhere beyond your sight? Here, every sip begins with your own hands, making even the simplest cup of milk feel like something personally earned. Nearby, pigs announce their impatience with loud grunts that echo across the yard. They consume scraps that would otherwise be wasted, quietly turning leftovers into one of the household's most valuable resources over the course of the year. Nothing on the farm exists in isolation. The animals provide food, labor, clothing, and fertilizer, while the family provides constant care in return, creating a balance that must be maintained every single day without exception. Even a missed morning carries consequences. Water left unfetched, feed forgotten, or a broken fence ignored can quickly become problems far larger than the few minutes needed to prevent them in the first place. Your hands grow colder despite the work. Leather gloves help only so much before dampness settles into the fabric, and soon your fingers begin to lose their warmth while the chores continue, without slowing for your comfort. The smell surrounding the barn is powerful, yet strangely alive. Hay, damp wood, livestock, and earth combine into an atmosphere that speaks not of neglect but of constant activity, reminding you that survival has its own unmistakable scent. Once the animals have been fed and watered, another responsibility immediately replaces the last. Buckets must be carried, tools returned, gates secured, and every small task completed properly, because tomorrow's work always depends upon today's discipline. Only then do you pause long enough to look across the fields stretching beyond the farmhouse. The land appears calm beneath the morning light, almost peaceful from a distance, but you already understand that every acre before you represents countless hours of labor waiting patiently for human hands. The fields do not care whether you are tired, cold, or aching from yesterday's work. They answer only to the seasons, and anyone hoping to survive another year must learn to follow their rhythm rather than fight against it. As you begin walking toward the farmland, one thought quietly settles into your mind. If the morning alone has demanded this much effort before the real work has even begun, what will the rest of the day ask of you before the sun finally disappears beyond the horizon? The first rows welcome you without ceremony. There are no engines waiting to shoulder the burden, no distant hum of machinery, and no shortcut hidden somewhere beyond the horizon. Everything the land produces this year will depend upon steady hands, patient endurance, and the willingness to repeat thousands of ordinary movements until they become almost invisible. If the season calls for planting, every seed must find its place one careful handful at a time. If the crops are already growing, weeds demand your attention before they steal precious nutrients from the soil, and if harvest has arrived, every hour of daylight becomes too valuable to waste because winter is already approaching, whether you choose to think about it or not. The work begins with a simple tool resting comfortably in hands that have learned its weight through years of practice. The handle feels smooth where countless fingers have gripped it before yours, while the metal edge bears quiet marks left behind by seasons of labor rather than neglect. There is nothing dramatic about the movement itself. You bend, lift, clear, straighten, and begin again, allowing your body to settle into a rhythm that slowly replaces thought with repetition until minutes quietly disappear into hours. The sun climbs higher, bringing light rather than relief. Even during cooler months, constant labor warms your body beneath layers of wool, leaving your back damp while cold air continues to brush against your face every time the breeze changes direction. No one complains about the weather because nobody expects it to cooperate. Rain delays the work, drought threatens the harvest, frost arrives too early or too late, and every season teaches the same lesson. Nature follows its own schedule, never yours. Would modern life feel different if your family's future depended entirely on whether the weather remained favorable for just a few more weeks? Suddenly, every cloud drifting across the sky becomes something worth watching, not for beauty alone, but for what it might bring. Nearby, other members of the household move with the same quiet determination. Children carry smaller loads suited to their strength. Older relatives handle tasks that experience accomplishes better than speed, and everyone contributes because survival leaves little room for idle hands. Childhood itself looks different here. Games certainly exist, and laughter still finds its place between chores, but responsibility arrives early, teaching boys and girls that usefulness is not something postponed until adulthood, but expected almost as soon as they are able to help. Education often follows a different rhythm as well. Some children attend local schools when circumstances allow, while many others learn practical skills at home, where every completed task becomes another lesson preparing them for the life waiting ahead. Reading and writing are respected abilities, yet they compete with demands that cannot simply be postponed. A field needing attention today rarely waits until tomorrow because someone wishes to spend another hour practicing letters or numbers. As the morning continues, your hands begin to reveal the cost of this routine. Small blisters threaten to become calluses, your shoulders tighten beneath repeated effort, and muscles you rarely notice in modern life quietly remind you that they have been working without rest since sunrise. You pause only long enough to wipe sweat from your forehead before returning immediately to the task before you. Rest is measured in moments rather than minutes, because every unfinished row standing ahead represents work that will still be waiting when the light begins to fade. The landscape surrounding you appears peaceful from a distance. Gentle hills, open fields, scattered trees, and clear skies might look almost picturesque to someone passing through. Yet living within this beauty requires constant labor that the scenery itself never reveals. There is a quiet satisfaction in seeing visible progress unfold beneath your own efforts. A completed row, a cleared section of ground, or neatly gathered crops provide proof that your work matters, even if tomorrow brings another long list of tasks waiting to replace the ones you have just finished. As the morning stretches toward midday, hunger slowly returns despite the breakfast that seemed sufficient only a few hours ago. The food gave you enough strength to begin the day, but the land has already claimed much of that energy for itself, and before long another brief pause will become necessary. Not because the work is finished, but because your body simply cannot continue without it. By now, the sun stands high enough to cast short shadows across the fields, quietly announcing that half the morning has already slipped away. Your arms feel heavier than they did at sunrise. Your breathing has settled into the rhythm of constant labor, and every movement reminds you that fatigue is no longer something waiting in the distance. It has become part of the work itself. No bell signals a break, and no clock tells you when to stop. Instead, years of habit and the position of the sun determine the moment when the family finally pauses, gathering beneath the shade of a nearby tree or beside a fence where a few precious minutes can be spared before the afternoon begins. The midday meal is simple because simplicity keeps people alive. A cloth is unfolded to reveal coarse bread, a piece of smoked meat if the household has been fortunate, perhaps a wedge of cheese, and whatever preserved vegetables remain from the previous harvest. Nothing arrives hot from a kitchen waiting just beyond the field. Everything has been prepared before sunrise, packed carefully, and carried here because returning home would consume time the farm cannot afford to lose. You lower yourself onto the ground with far more gratitude than elegance. The earth beneath you feels firm after hours of standing, and for the first time since leaving the house, your back is allowed to rest, even if only briefly. The food disappears quickly, not because it is extraordinary, but because your body demands fuel with an urgency that leaves little room for conversation. Every bite replaces energy already spent, turning an ordinary meal into another tool as necessary as the shovel or the hoe resting nearby. Fresh water is precious, though no one drinks carelessly. Wells provide most households with their supply, yet everyone understands that water can change from one place to another, making every source a matter of trust built through experience rather than certainty. Would you still think of lunch as a chance to relax if you knew another 6 or 7 hours of demanding work still waited ahead? The pause feels less like leisure and more like borrowing a few quiet moments before the day's true test begins again. Conversation, when it happens, stays practical. Someone mentions a fence needing repair. Another wonders whether tomorrow's weather will remain favorable, while a parent quietly reminds a child about chores still waiting back at the farmhouse. Even these few minutes reveal how closely every member of the household depends upon the others. One person prepares food, another cares for the animals, someone else watches the younger children, and together they create a rhythm that allows the family to keep moving forward despite the endless demands surrounding them. Laughter occasionally breaks through the seriousness, surprising you with how naturally it appears. Life here is undeniably difficult, yet hardship has never erased the human ability to find humor in small mistakes, familiar stories, or a neighbor's gentle joke shared between bites of bread. The break ends almost as quietly as it began. No one needs to announce it because everyone understands that unfinished work has been patiently waiting throughout the meal, unchanged by the few moments of rest. You rise more slowly than before, feeling the stiffness settle into your legs almost immediately. The muscles that welcome the pause now resist returning to motion, but resisting changes nothing. and within moments you are walking back toward the rows once again. The afternoon carries a different kind of challenge. Morning energy has faded, yet the workload remains exactly the same, demanding discipline rather than enthusiasm as the hours continue to unfold beneath the steady movement of the sun. Across the fields, neighboring families are doing exactly what you are doing. From this distance, each figure bends, lifts, carries, and repeats the same familiar motions, creating a quiet picture of a society held together not by grand events, but by millions of ordinary acts of persistence. As you grip your tools once more, a quiet realization begins to settle over you. Surviving in 1776 is not defined by one dramatic struggle or a single heroic moment. It is built through countless small efforts repeated every day without applause, and the afternoon has only just begun. The afternoon settles into a slower rhythm, not because the work has become easier, but because your body has accepted that exhaustion is now part of the day. Every swing of the tool feels slightly heavier than the last, yet stopping is never really an option when the harvest, the soil, and the changing seasons refuse to wait for anyone. The hours seem to stretch endlessly beneath the autumn sky. You glance toward the sun from time to time, hoping to find it closer to the horizon than it really is, only to discover that far more daylight remains than your aching muscles would have guessed. Fatigue changes the way you think. Instead of worrying about tomorrow or next month, your mind shrinks its focus to the next row, the next bundle, the next few steps, because dividing the work into smaller victories is often the only way to keep moving forward. Around you, the sounds of labor create their own quiet rhythm. Steel cuts through soil, wooden wheels creak beneath heavy loads, distant voices carry across the fields, and somewhere beyond the trees an axe strikes timber with steady determination. No machine interrupts the silence with the roar of an engine. Every sound belongs to people, animals, or simple tools, creating a landscape where human effort remains the loudest force shaping the countryside. If one person slows down, everyone notices. Families depend upon shared effort so completely that each pair of hands carries real value, making cooperation less a choice than a necessity built into everyday survival. Have you ever thought about how rarely modern life demands that every member of a household contribute to the same physical task? Here, even the youngest children understand that helping is not simply appreciated, it is expected. The older generations move differently than the younger ones. They may no longer work as quickly, yet years of experience allow them to solve problems almost instinctively, noticing changes in the soil, the weather, or the crops long before anyone else recognizes the signs. Knowledge is rarely written down. It passes from parent to child through observation, repetition, and quiet correction, becoming part of daily life until lessons learned through countless seasons feel as natural as breathing. A father shows his son how deeply to drive a tool into the earth. A mother teaches her daughter how to judge preserved food by smell alone. These ordinary moments become classrooms without desks, where mistakes carry consequences far more immediate than poor grades. The afternoon light slowly changes, becoming warmer as the sun begins its long descent. Shadows stretch across the fields once again, offering the first visible promise that the day's labor is finally moving toward its conclusion. Relief, however, does not arrive with the lengthening shadows. There are still wagons to unload, tools to clean, animals to check, and supplies to organize before anyone can think about returning indoors. Every tool receives careful attention before being put away. A neglected blade dulls more quickly, a damaged handle may fail when it is needed most, and replacing even simple equipment demands time and money that few families can easily spare. Nothing is treated as disposable because almost nothing can be replaced without sacrifice. Clothing is patched, barrels are repaired, buckets are mended, and broken tools are fixed again and again until they truly can serve no longer. This habit reaches far beyond simple thrift. It reflects a world where every object represents hours of human labor, making waste feel almost unthinkable to people who understand exactly what it costs to produce even the simplest possessions. As the final tasks in the field come to an end, you straighten your back and look across the land one more time. The rows completed today seem almost insignificant against the size of the farm, yet you know that every successful harvest is built from countless days that looked almost exactly like this one. The walk back toward the farmhouse feels noticeably slower than the walk away from it that morning. Your boots are heavier with mud. Your shoulders ache beneath the weight of the day, and every step reminds you that although the hardest work is nearly over, evening still holds responsibilities of its own. In the distance, thin streams of smoke rise once more from chimneys across the countryside. Families everywhere are returning home at nearly the same moment, carrying the same tired bodies, the same quiet satisfaction, and the same hope that tomorrow's work will prove just as productive as today's. The familiar shape of the farmhouse grows larger with every weary step, and although the hardest labor of the day is behind you, nobody mistakes the walk home for the end of work. Evening is not a reward for surviving the afternoon, but another chapter filled with responsibilities that cannot simply be postponed until morning. The yard is alive once again. Chickens wander back toward their roosts, livestock waits for its final feeding, and the sounds of the farm shift from the rhythm of fieldwork to the quieter routine that prepares every living creature for the coming night. Before you even think about resting, the animals demand your attention one last time. Water buckets must be filled again, feed distributed carefully, and every gate checked before darkness settles over the countryside, because a single forgotten latch could undo weeks of careful work before sunrise. The cows return to the barn more slowly now, their day nearly finished just as yours is. Milking must be repeated, and although your hands are stiff from hours in the fields, they fall naturally into the same practiced rhythm that greeted the morning. The bucket gradually fills while warm breath drifts through the cool evening air. It is quiet work, almost peaceful compared with the constant movement of the fields, giving you a rare moment when the day seems willing to slow its relentless pace. Nearby, younger children gather eggs one final time before dusk. They move carefully through the coop, knowing that even this simple chore matters because every egg saved today becomes food that may be needed tomorrow. Would evenings feel different if your responsibilities continued long after leaving your workplace? Here, there is no clear line separating labor from home, because home itself is one of the places where the greatest amount of work still remains. Firewood waits in a neat stack beside the house, but tomorrow's warmth depends upon today's preparation. More logs must be carried indoors before nightfall, ensuring that someone will have dry wood ready when the morning fire needs to be coaxed back to life once again. Each armful feels heavier than the last. Your shoulders protest with every trip between the woodpile and the doorway, yet experience has taught you that neglecting this task only guarantees a colder, more difficult beginning to tomorrow. Inside the house, the fire has already been strengthened. Its orange glow reaches across the room, pushing back the early darkness while filling the air with the familiar smell of burning oak and simmering food prepared from ingredients carefully stretched to feed everyone gathered under this roof. Supper is more substantial than breakfast, though it remains modest by modern standards. A pot hangs above the flames filled with stew made from vegetables stored through the season, perhaps enriched with salted meat if supplies allow, creating a meal designed less to impress than to restore strength after an exhausting day. The aroma alone is enough to remind you how long it has been since the midday meal. Hours of physical labor have left your body eager for warmth as much as nourishment, and the first spoonful seems to travel through you almost as quickly as the fire's heat. Conversation begins to replace silence now that the hardest work has ended. Family members quietly exchange news from the day, discuss repairs that cannot wait, and consider tomorrow's weather with the careful attention of people whose lives remain closely tied to every change in the sky. There is no television drawing everyone's eyes toward a glowing screen. There are no phones interrupting the conversation, no endless stream of distant voices competing for attention, only the people sharing this single room and the stories carried home from the day's work. Sometimes a neighbor stops by before the evening grows too late. News travels from farm to farm through conversations like these, spreading information about local events, nearby markets, changing conditions, or families who may need a helping hand before winter settles in completely. These visits strengthen something easily overlooked in modern life. Communities survive because people know one another personally, sharing tools, labor, advice, and support whenever hardship becomes too great for one household to carry alone. As the meal comes to an end, the bowls are carefully emptied and cleaned. Nothing suitable for eating is wasted, leftovers are preserved whenever possible, and every remaining crumb reflects the effort required to place that food upon the table in the first place. For a brief moment, the room grows unusually peaceful. The fire crackles softly, tired voices become quieter, and you realize that although this day has demanded more from your body than most modern weeks ever will, it still has one final lesson waiting before sleep finally arrives. The evening meal has ended, but nobody rises from the table believing the day is truly over. The bowls have been cleared, the last pieces of bread carefully saved, and although your body begs for rest, countless small responsibilities still stand between you and sleep. Nothing inside this house is left unattended simply because darkness has arrived. The fire must be adjusted so that enough embers survive until morning. Spare food is carefully covered to protect it from curious mice, and every useful object is returned to its familiar place before the room falls quiet. You move slowly now, not because the work has become difficult, but because fatigue has settled into every muscle. Your hands seem heavier than they did only a few hours ago, and even lifting a wooden bucket reminds you how much strength the fields have already claimed. The children begin slowing down as well. Those who spent the day helping outdoors struggle to keep their eyes open, while the youngest lean quietly against their parents, listening to conversations they may not fully understand but have heard countless evenings before. This is often the only part of the day when an entire family can simply remain together. There is no rush towards separate bedrooms, no competing schedules, and no endless distractions demanding attention from every direction. Instead, everyone gathers close to the warmth of the hearth. The dancing firelight fills the room with shifting shadows, making familiar faces appear softer as the outside world slowly disappears beneath the growing darkness. Have you noticed how different silence feels without electricity? Once the sun sets, the world becomes smaller, quieter, and somehow more intimate, leaving people with little choice except to enjoy each other's company or simply sit beside the fire listening to the gentle crackle of burning wood. Stories naturally become part of the evening. Someone recalls an unusually harsh winter from years before. Another remembers a neighbor whose clever decision saved an entire harvest, and the older members of the family quietly pass along lessons that experience has taught more effectively than any written book. Not every story is meant only to entertain. Some carry warnings disguised as memories, reminding younger listeners about dangerous storms, difficult seasons, or mistakes that should never be repeated if the family hopes to prosper in the years ahead. Faith also holds an important place in many households. Before the day finally comes to an end, a prayer may be spoken in gratitude for food, shelter, and another safe return from the fields, while everyone quietly hopes that tomorrow will offer the same blessing once again. Life has taught these families that certainty is a luxury. Crops may fail, illness may arrive without warning, and fortunes can change with a single season, making gratitude feel less like tradition and more like an essential part of everyday survival. The light inside the house grows dimmer as candles burn lower. Every inch of wax has value, so no one allows them to burn longer than necessary, and whenever the fire provides enough illumination, precious candles remain untouched for another evening. Without bright lights filling every corner, the night gently encourages the household toward sleep. Conversations become shorter, voices softer, and one by one the family begins preparing for another night that will pass much like the last. You remove only the outer layers of your clothing because tomorrow morning they will be needed again almost immediately. Carefully folded garments are placed where they can be found before sunrise, preserving both order and precious time when another demanding day begins. The bedding waiting for you has not changed since yesterday. It is still firm, still uneven, and still shared with those closest to you. Yet after everything your body has endured, it somehow feels far more welcoming than it did the previous night. As you settle beneath the rough blankets, the warmth lingering from those beside you slowly pushes back the evening chill. Outside, the wind brushes gently against the walls. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks once before falling silent, and the fire lets out one final crackle before its glow begins to fade. Your eyes grow heavier with every passing moment. Looking back across this ordinary day, you realize something remarkable. There was no single extraordinary event, no dramatic adventure, and no great historical turning point. Only the quiet determination required to wake, work, endure, and prepare to do it all again tomorrow. And perhaps that is the greatest surprise of all. History is often remembered through famous battles and celebrated leaders, but for millions of ordinary people living in 1776, true courage was found in the countless unnoticed moments that filled each day from dawn until long after darkness had settled over the land. Morning will arrive sooner than you expect. There will be no alarm resting on a bedside table, no glowing screen announcing the hour, and no gentle melody chosen to ease you awake. Instead, your body will answer to habits shaped by years of necessity, rising once more before the first pale light touches the horizon, because life in 1776 rarely allows anyone the luxury of sleeping longer than the work demands. As you drift toward sleep, one final thought quietly settles into your mind. Every comfort you left behind, clean running water, electric light, warm showers, refrigerated food, modern medicine, soft mattresses, instant communication, and machines that quietly perform exhausting labor without complaint, would seem almost unimaginable to the people sharing this small farmhouse with you tonight. Yet something unexpected has revealed itself throughout this ordinary day. Despite the hardships, despite the endless work, despite the cold mornings and aching muscles, these families continue building homes, raising children, sharing meals, helping neighbors, and finding reasons to laugh before another sunrise begins the cycle all over again. It becomes impossible not to admire the resilience hidden inside lives that history rarely celebrates. Their names may never appear in books, no statues will remember their daily struggles, and no famous speeches will be written about the countless hours they spend simply keeping their families alive. Yet without people exactly like them, the nation growing around them could never have existed. Perhaps that is the greatest difference between your world and theirs. Modern life often hides the effort required to keep society moving, while every ordinary task in 1776 openly reveals the labor, patience, and cooperation that make survival possible from one season to the next. If you returned home tomorrow carrying only the memories of this single day, how differently would you see the ordinary routines waiting for you? Would a warm bed feel the same after sleeping on straw? Would a glass of clean water seem as ordinary as it once did? Or would every simple convenience quietly remind you of generations who lived without them? History has a remarkable way of changing us when we stop looking only at great events and begin paying attention to ordinary people. It reminds us that the past was not inhabited by characters in faded paintings, but by men, women, and children who woke each morning with the same hopes, worries, responsibilities, and quiet determination that still shape human lives today. As the last embers settle into glowing red beneath a layer of soft ash, the farmhouse finally grows silent. Outside, the stars stretch across an unpolluted sky with astonishing clarity, while inside every exhausted soul rests knowing that tomorrow will demand the same strength, the same discipline, and the same unwavering commitment that today required. Your breathing slows, the sounds around you gradually disappear, and sleep finally claims the day. Somewhere beyond these wooden walls, history continues unfolding one ordinary sunrise at a time, built not only by generals, politicians, or famous revolutionaries, but by countless families whose greatest achievement was simply meeting each new day with courage. And now, as you quietly leave this journey behind and return to the comfort of the present, perhaps the most important question remains with you. If you had truly awakened in the America of 1776 instead of merely imagining it for a single day, would you have found the strength to endure until nightfall? Or would the ordinary reality of everyday life have proven far more challenging than any history book could ever describe? The farmhouse has finally fallen silent, but the night itself has no intention of doing the same. As your eyes adjust to the darkness, you begin to notice a world that daylight had quietly hidden, where every unfamiliar sound seems larger than it truly is, and every creak in the old timber invites your imagination to fill the silence with possibilities. The fire resting beneath its blanket of glowing embers has become the heart of the house once again. It no longer lights the room as it did during supper, yet everyone depends upon it surviving until dawn. because losing those precious coals would mean beginning tomorrow in complete darkness with the difficult task of creating fire from nothing. Outside, the wind moves across the fields with slow determination. It slips between weathered boards, rattles loose shutters, and brushes against the roof with a gentle persistence that reminds you how thin the barrier is between your family and the vast countryside stretching into the night. Without electric lights, the darkness reaches farther than anything you have experienced before. Beyond the small glow of the hearth, the landscape disappears almost entirely, leaving only the moon and the stars to separate the earth from the sky. Have you ever stood somewhere so dark that your eyes searched for familiar landmarks and found only shadows? For people living in 1776, this was not unusual or frightening. It was simply the way every evening unfolded once the sun disappeared below the horizon. The sky above you is breathtaking in a way that modern generations rarely witness. Thousands upon thousands of stars burn with remarkable clarity, their light untouched by street lamps or city skylines, transforming the heavens into a map that many travelers know almost as well as the roads beneath their feet. Long before satellite navigation existed, these stars served as trusted companions. Farmers judged the passing seasons by familiar constellations, sailors crossed vast oceans beneath their guidance, and travelers often relied upon the night sky when every path ahead looked exactly the same. Inside the house, sleep comes in waves rather than perfect silence. Someone shifts beneath a blanket, another cough echoes softly through the room, and from a nearby cradle comes the quiet sound of an infant settling back into peaceful sleep after only a brief moment of restlessness. No one expects uninterrupted sleep. A crying child, an animal disturbed outside, or a change in the weather can wake an entire household within moments, reminding everyone that even the night carries its own responsibilities. Then comes a sound from somewhere beyond the barn. It is faint, almost too faint to notice. A short rustle, then silence. You remain still, listening carefully as your heartbeat briefly grows louder than the world outside. In your own century, such a sound might barely deserve a second thought. But here, every unexpected noise carries practical importance because livestock represent months, sometimes years, of irreplaceable work. Perhaps it is only a deer passing along the edge of the field, perhaps a fox searching for chickens, or perhaps nothing at all except the wind moving through dry grass. Experience teaches people living here not to panic, but neither does it allow them to ignore unusual sounds completely. Would you climb out of your warm bed to investigate, knowing that the cold waits outside and tomorrow's exhausting work begins before sunrise? Or would you trust that whatever made the noise has already disappeared into the darkness? For most families, caution usually outweighs curiosity. Unless the disturbance becomes unmistakable, remaining indoors is often the wiser decision, especially on long winter nights when a twisted ankle or an unnecessary accident could create far greater problems than the mysterious sound itself. Eventually, the quiet returns. The wind softens. The animals settle once more. Even the old farmhouse seems to exhale as its wooden frame relaxes against the cooling night air. Little by little, your breathing matches the slow rhythm surrounding you. Tomorrow will demand another full day of labor. But for these few precious hours, beneath a sky brighter than any you have ever known, the world finally allows itself to rest. The first pale light has not yet returned, but something else has already awakened. From somewhere beyond the fields comes the distant bark of a dog, answered moments later by another farther away, creating a chain of signals that drifts across the quiet countryside before fading once more into the darkness. Dogs in 1776 are far more than companions waiting beside the fire. They guard livestock, warn of strangers approaching in the night, help track game through dense woodland, and often provide the earliest warning that something unusual is moving beyond the edge of the farm. Most nights, those warnings lead to nothing extraordinary. A wandering deer searching for food, a curious raccoon slipping between fences, or a fox testing its luck near the chicken coop can stir enough excitement to wake both dogs and owners before disappearing without leaving more than a few tracks behind. Predators remain a genuine concern, though. Wolves still roam parts of the colonies, particularly in remote regions where forests stretch for miles without interruption, and while direct encounters with people are uncommon, livestock left unprotected can quickly become vulnerable. Imagine lying awake knowing that every animal outside represents weeks or even years of careful work. Would you sleep as soundly if the loss of a single cow or horse could threaten your family's survival through the coming winter? The forest surrounding many settlements feels entirely different after sunset. During daylight, it provides timber, fuel, food, and game, but once darkness settles between the trees, familiar paths seem to disappear into endless shadows where every sound appears much closer than it truly is. For families living along the frontier, these woods remain both friend and challenge. They offer countless resources to those who understand them, yet they also demand respect from anyone who forgets how quickly nature can overwhelm even the most experienced traveler. There are no flashing emergency lights on the horizon. No distant highways hum through the night. The silence is so complete that the snapping of a single branch can travel astonishing distances through the cool evening air. Sometimes the sound comes from a white-tailed deer stepping carefully through fallen leaves. Other times it is nothing more than a heavy limb settling naturally after a long day warmed by the sun. Without seeing the source, your imagination quietly begins supplying possibilities of its own. That imagination has always been part of rural life. Every generation passes along stories about unexplained noises, mysterious travelers, and strange events witnessed beneath moonlit skies. Most have perfectly ordinary explanations, yet around a fire late at night, certainty often gives way to curiosity. Children listen especially carefully to these stories. Wide-eyed and wrapped in blankets, they picture dense forests filled with hidden mysteries, while older family members smile quietly, remembering that they once listened with exactly the same mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Even practical lessons are often woven into these tales. A story about someone becoming lost after sunset teaches the importance of returning home before dark. Another about a neglected lantern reminds young listeners never to waste precious light or carelessly risk a fire inside a wooden house. Long before printed instruction manuals reached every household, storytelling became one of the most effective ways to preserve knowledge. Advice remembered as part of an unforgettable story was far less likely to be forgotten when the moment finally arrived to put it into practice. Would you remember a simple warning more clearly after hearing it repeated as a list of rules, or after listening to a tale that stayed with you for years? For many families in 1776, stories served as education, entertainment, and memory all at once. As the hours continue to pass, the night grows colder. Frost quietly forms across fences and fields, coating every surface with a thin layer of ice that will sparkle brilliantly once the first rays of sunrise finally reach the farm. Inside, the fire has nearly completed its work. The bright flames have disappeared, leaving only a bed of glowing coals patiently holding enough heat to survive until morning if fortune and careful preparation remain on your side. You drift once more into deeper sleep, unaware that only a few hours remain before another day begins exactly as the last one ended, with responsibility waiting just beyond the first light. In this world, history is not measured by extraordinary moments alone, but by the quiet endurance of ordinary people who greet each sunrise ready to begin again. A faint chill brushes your face long before you become fully aware of it. Somewhere beyond your dreams, the first hint of dawn is beginning to loosen the grip of the night, and although the sky remains dark, the farm is already preparing for another day exactly as it has for countless mornings before. The rooster calls once, then again with greater confidence, breaking the silence that had settled over the countryside for only a few precious hours. One by one, neighboring farms begin to answer with their own familiar chorus, until the landscape itself seems to awaken in slow, deliberate waves. You remain beneath the blankets for only a moment longer. The warmth trapped overnight is difficult to abandon, especially knowing that the room beyond the covers has grown cold once again. But delaying the inevitable serves no purpose when every hour of daylight already belongs to work. Without a word being spoken, the household slowly comes alive. Someone adds another log to the waiting embers, another quietly reaches for yesterday's clothing. And before long, the familiar sounds of another morning replace the peaceful silence that filled the room only moments ago. Nothing about this routine feels rushed, yet nothing is wasted either. Every movement has been repeated so many times that it no longer requires thought, allowing the family to prepare almost instinctively while the first pale light begins filtering through the small window. Have you noticed how many decisions disappear when life follows the same rhythm every day? There is no hesitation over what to wear, what to eat, or how to spend the morning, because necessity has already answered those questions long before anyone opens their eyes. Outside, the fields look entirely different beneath the early dawn. A silver layer of frost covers the grass, each blade catching the growing light until the ground seems dusted with tiny crystals stretching toward the distant tree line. The air feels cleaner than at any other hour. Every breath carries the sharp scent of damp earth, fresh timber, and smoke rising from chimneys where dozens of families are coaxing their own fires back to life, each beginning another ordinary day connected by the same quiet routines. As the sun slowly climbs above the horizon, the countryside transforms almost imperceptibly. Shadows retreat across open fields, birds replace the night's silence with steady songs, and the landscape reveals details hidden only minutes earlier beneath darkness. To someone arriving from the 21st century, the scene might appear almost peaceful enough to belong in a painting. Yet you now understand that behind every beautiful sunrise lies another day of relentless effort, where survival depends not upon inspiration or luck, but upon consistency repeated season after season. Perhaps that is the lesson this journey has been quietly building toward from the very beginning. The people of 1776 were not extraordinary because they lived dramatic lives every day. They were extraordinary because they met ordinary challenges with remarkable perseverance, asking little from the world except the chance to continue providing for those they loved. As you take one final look across the waking countryside, it becomes clear that history is not built only by famous victories or unforgettable speeches. More often, it is shaped by mornings exactly like this one, when countless unnamed families rise before sunrise, shoulder the responsibilities waiting outside their doors, and through thousands of small acts of determination, slowly build the future that later generations will simply call the past. As another morning begins, you find yourself noticing details that would have escaped you only a day ago. The rough grain of the wooden doorway beneath your hand, the familiar scent of smoke clinging to every piece of clothing, and the quiet confidence with which each member of the household begins their duties all reveal a truth that history books rarely capture. Survival is built through routine far more often than through remarkable moments. You watch your neighbors from a distance as they emerge from their own homes, almost in unison. One family carries water from a nearby well. Another leads a horse toward the road before the village has fully awakened, while children, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, already begin gathering firewood scattered by yesterday's wind. There is no need for spoken instructions because everyone understands what the day requires. Responsibilities are learned through years of observation until they become instinct, allowing an entire household to move together with remarkable efficiency before breakfast has even finished. If someone unexpectedly falls ill, that rhythm changes immediately. A son may take over his father's work, a daughter may assume additional household duties, and neighbors often step forward without being asked, recognizing that hardship shared today may one day be returned when fortune changes. Communities like this survive because cooperation is woven into everyday life. Borrowing tools, exchanging labor during harvest, helping rebuild a damaged barn, or assisting a family struck by illness is not viewed as extraordinary generosity, but as an ordinary investment in everyone's future. Would modern neighborhoods feel different if people depended upon one another this directly? When every family understands that tomorrow's difficulty could just as easily become their own, helping others begins to feel less like charity and more like common sense. The nearby village slowly comes to life as wagons begin rolling along narrow dirt roads. Their wooden wheels bounce over uneven ground, carrying flour, timber, tools, cloth, and countless other necessities that connect isolated farms with the wider colonial world. Travel itself remains slow enough to shape how people think about distance. A destination 20 miles away is not a quick errand, but a journey requiring careful planning, favorable weather, and often an entire day devoted to the trip alone. News moves at much the same pace. There are no headlines appearing instantly, no messages crossing the continent within seconds, and no broadcasts reaching every household at once. Information travels with travelers, merchants, riders, letters, and conversation, sometimes taking days or weeks before reaching distant communities. This slower rhythm changes the experience of daily life in surprising ways. Most people concern themselves first with the world they can actually see, the condition of their fields, the health of their family, the reliability of their neighbors, and the weather gathering above them. Because these realities affect tomorrow far more directly than events unfolding hundreds of miles away. Even so, the wider world is never completely absent. A traveler arriving from another colony may bring stories that spread rapidly from farmhouse to farmhouse, each conversation adding another piece to events taking shape beyond the local horizon. For a few evenings afterward, those stories become the center of discussion beside countless hearths. People compare what they have heard, question what seems unlikely, and quietly wonder how distant decisions might eventually reach even their small corner of the colonies. Standing quietly beside the road, you begin to understand that history rarely arrives with dramatic music or unmistakable announcements. More often, it approaches gradually, carried by tired horses, folded letters, and conversations between ordinary people who cannot yet see how their own lives will become part of something much larger than themselves. The village grows busier as the morning unfolds, revealing that no family truly lives in isolation. Farmers arrive with wagons carrying sacks of grain, barrels of cider, bundles of firewood, and carefully crafted goods, while blacksmiths, millers, coopers, and wheelwrights prepare for another day, serving a community where every trade supports countless others. The blacksmith's forge quickly becomes one of the busiest places in town. Before long, the steady ring of hammer against glowing iron echoes through the streets as horses wait patiently for new shoes. Broken plows are repaired for the coming week's work, and worn tools receive fresh edges that may determine whether a family's harvest succeeds or fails. Step inside for only a few moments, and the heat is almost overwhelming. Sparks leap from the anvil with every strike, smoke curls upward through the roof, and the smell of hot iron fills the air while years of practice skill transform simple metal into objects that hundreds of hands will rely upon every single day. Without craftsmen like these, colonial life would slow almost to a standstill. A cracked wagon wheel could delay an entire harvest, a broken axe might prevent enough firewood from being gathered before winter, and a damaged horseshoe could leave a farmer stranded many miles from home. Just beyond the forge, another familiar sound rises above the conversations. The village mill never remains quiet for long because nearly every family depends upon it, bringing sacks of corn or wheat to be ground into the flour that will become tomorrow's bread. The miller's work is steady from sunrise until evening. Huge wooden gears turn with remarkable precision, driven by flowing water that never grows tired, proving that long before electricity, people had already learned to harness nature's strength in surprisingly ingenious ways. Have you ever stopped to think how many people contribute to something as ordinary as a loaf of bread? Here, every meal reflects the combined efforts of farmers, millers, coopers, wagon drivers, blacksmiths, and countless others whose work quietly connects one household to another. Nearby, the cooper shapes wooden staves into sturdy barrels with remarkable speed. These containers preserve flour, salted meat, dried apples, cider, and countless other supplies, making them among the most valuable everyday objects in the colonies because protecting food often matters just as much as producing it. Nothing leaves the workshop without purpose. Every board, every nail, every strip of leather has already required hours of labor before reaching the craftsman's hands, encouraging careful workmanship instead of unnecessary waste. Children watch these skilled workers with quiet fascination. Some may one day inherit a family farm, while others will apprentice under experienced craftsmen, spending years learning trades that demand patience, discipline, and an attention to detail impossible to master overnight. An apprenticeship is far more than simple employment. It is an education built through observation and repetition, where every successful repair and every corrected mistake gradually shape a young worker into someone capable of carrying the trade forward for another generation. The marketplace itself continues filling with voices. Neighbors exchange news while inspecting fresh produce, comparing tools, discussing weather, and negotiating fair prices. But beneath every conversation lies something even more important: trust. Reputation travels quickly in a community this small, making honesty one of the most valuable possessions anyone can earn. As you walk slowly through the village, another realization quietly takes shape. This is not merely a collection of separate families struggling alone, but an intricate network of people whose daily lives depend upon one another in ways that modern society often hides. Every repaired plow, every loaf of bread, every barrel, every horseshoe, and every shared conversation becomes another thread holding the entire community together, proving that the true strength of colonial America was found not only in its history, but in the ordinary people who build it together one day at a time. The marketplace slowly reaches its busiest hour, and with every passing minute you begin to understand that commerce in 1776 is measured not by speed, but by conversation. Every purchase becomes an opportunity to exchange news, compare harvests, discuss the weather, and strengthen relationships that may prove far more valuable than the coins changing hands. Money certainly exists, but it is not always the easiest way to settle a transaction. In many communities, goods and services are exchanged directly because trust often carries greater value than currency, especially between neighbors who have known one another for years. A farmer may leave with a repaired wagon after promising payment once the harvest is sold. Another trades a barrel of apples for a sack of flour, while someone else agrees to help raise a neighbor's new barn in return for assistance when spring planting begins. Would modern shopping feel different if every purchase depended upon your reputation instead of a bank card? Here, your word can be just as important as the contents of your pocket, and a single broken promise may follow you far longer than any unpaid debt. Near the center of the village, merchants display goods that have traveled astonishing distances before reaching these colonies. Fine cloth from Europe, spices carried across oceans, glassware packed with extraordinary care, and small luxury items attract curious eyes, reminding everyone that even this quiet settlement is connected to a much larger world. For most families, however, these imported products remain occasional indulgences rather than everyday necessities. Practical needs always come first, leaving decorative possessions to those fortunate enough to enjoy a little extra prosperity after the essentials have been secured. One object, no larger than your hand, may represent weeks of careful saving. A polished pewter spoon, a finely woven blanket, or a well-made iron kettle can remain within the same family for generations, valued not simply because of its usefulness, but because replacing it would require considerable sacrifice. This attitude changes the way people care for their belongings. Nothing is casually discarded, nothing is replaced merely because something newer has appeared, and every repaired object quietly reflects the patience of those determined to make it last for as many years as possible. As you continue through the market, the scent of freshly baked bread drifts from a nearby oven, mixing with the aromas of leather, wood shavings, smoke, livestock, and damp earth. It is a rich, unmistakable reminder that every corner of the village is alive with skilled hands transforming raw materials into the necessities of daily life. Children weave between the adults with remarkable confidence. Some carry baskets for their parents, others deliver messages across the village, and a few pause only briefly to admire toys carved from wood. Simple creations that require imagination rather than machinery to bring them to life. Their games reflect the world around them. A smooth stick becomes a sword, a rolling hoop becomes an afternoon's entertainment, and a handful of marbles can occupy an entire group for hours without anyone wishing for anything more elaborate. Watching them, you realize that childhood has never been defined by the number of possessions someone owns. Laughter sounds much the same across every century, even if the toys, clothing, and surroundings look entirely different from those of the modern world. As the afternoon slowly approaches once again, merchants begin preparing for customers making their final purchases before returning to distant farms. Wagons are loaded carefully, animals are harnessed, and familiar farewells echo through the streets, each one carrying the quiet expectation that everyone will meet again when the next market day arrives. Standing at the edge of the village, you look back one final time before beginning the journey home. What first appeared to be a small, ordinary settlement has revealed itself as something far more remarkable, a living network of trust, craftsmanship, cooperation, and resilience, where every conversation, every exchanged tool, and every shared favor quietly strengthens the community. It is here, in these everyday moments rarely recorded by history, that the true heartbeat of colonial America continues to reveal itself, one ordinary day at a time. The road leading away from the village feels different in the afternoon than it did only a few hours earlier. Wagons creak beneath heavier loads. Horses move at an unhurried pace after a busy morning, and familiar faces disappear one by one down narrow country lanes, each traveler returning to a farm where another evening of work is already waiting. Travel is never taken lightly in 1776. Every journey demands preparation because rough roads, changing weather, and the simple distance between settlements mean that even an ordinary trip to the market occupies much of the day. Most roads are little more than well-worn paths carved into the landscape by generations of wagons, horses, and determined footsteps. Rain transforms them into deep mud, dry summers leave them coated in dust, and harsh winters can make them nearly impossible to cross until the weather finally relents. Bridges, where they exist at all, are practical rather than impressive. Many streams are crossed by simple wooden structures built and maintained by local communities, while smaller waterways are often forded directly, forcing travelers to judge carefully whether the current is safe enough to pass. Imagine planning every journey around daylight instead of convenience. There are no headlights to guide you home after sunset, no weather forecast warning of tomorrow's storm, and no guarantee that help will arrive quickly if a wagon breaks many miles from the nearest settlement. For this reason, people rarely travel alone unless necessity demands it. Friends, relatives, or neighboring families often share the road together, making long journeys safer while turning hours of walking or riding into opportunities for conversation. Those conversations become the threads connecting distant communities. News, advice, farming techniques, prices, and family stories move from one settlement to another through travelers who unknowingly carry information just as valuable as the goods packed into their wagons. Occasionally, the road welcomes someone from much farther away, a merchant from another colony, a sailor traveling inland, or an immigrant beginning a completely new life may pass through the village, bringing unfamiliar accents, different customs, and stories that seem almost unbelievable to those who have never traveled beyond their own county. For a brief moment, the wider world feels astonishingly close. You hear about bustling ports crowded with ships from across the Atlantic, cities far larger than anything you have ever imagined, and roads stretching toward places whose names are known, but whose distances remain difficult to comprehend. Yet most people listening will never see those places for themselves. Their world is measured not by continents, but by the fields they cultivate, the neighbors they trust, and the familiar landscape surrounding the home where nearly every important memory has been made. That realization changes the meaning of home itself. It is not simply the building where you sleep, but the center of an entire life, the place where generations are born, work together, celebrate, grieve, and slowly shape the future without ever expecting history to remember their names. As the village disappears behind a gentle rise in the road, your attention returns to the countryside spreading quietly before you. Smoke rises from isolated farmhouses, cattle graze behind weathered fences, and narrow trails weave through forests that seem almost endless beneath the afternoon sun. There is an unmistakable peace in the landscape, but now you understand that this peace exists only because thousands of ordinary people rise every morning to maintain it. Every repaired fence, harvested field, stacked woodpile, and carefully tended animal represents another small act of perseverance hidden behind the beauty of the scene. The journey home continues at an easy pace, giving you time to reflect on everything you have witnessed since sunrise. What first appeared to be a simpler way of life has revealed itself as something far more demanding, requiring resilience, cooperation, practical knowledge, and an unwavering commitment to responsibilities that begin before dawn and rarely end until long after darkness returns. And as the farmhouse gradually comes back into view, another thought quietly takes shape. If a single ordinary day has already revealed so much about the realities of colonial America, what other parts of daily life remain hidden beneath the surface, waiting patiently to be discovered by anyone willing to look a little closer? The rhythm of the farm greets you once again as you step through the familiar gate, but this time your attention is drawn to something you have not yet fully appreciated. A colonial farm is far more than a place where food is grown. It is a carefully balanced system where every field, every building, every animal, and every member of the household depends upon the others in ways that are easy to overlook until you witness them together. The barn stands at the center of that system. From the outside, it appears sturdy and uncomplicated, yet inside it protects the family's greatest investments from rain, snow, and bitter winter winds. Hay fills the loft above, tools hang neatly along rough wooden walls, and every corner has a purpose earned through years of practical experience rather than decoration. A horse is brushed carefully before being returned to its stall. Unlike the machines of your own time, this animal cannot simply be turned off after a day's work. It must be fed, watered, inspected for injuries, and allowed to recover, because tomorrow's journey may depend entirely upon its health. Horses are among the most valuable possessions a family can own. They pull plows through stubborn soil, haul wagons loaded with harvests, transport families across long distances, and make tasks possible that would otherwise demand many more hours of exhausting labor. Would you think differently about transportation if your vehicle needed food every day, grew tired after long journeys, and could become sick without warning? Suddenly, caring for the horse becomes just as important as reaching your destination. Nearby, a pair of oxen stands quietly chewing their feed. They move more slowly than horses, but their immense strength makes them indispensable for the heaviest work on the farm, especially when clearing land or pulling massive loads across uneven ground. Every animal has a role that extends beyond simple usefulness. Chickens provide eggs, sheep offer wool that will eventually become warm clothing. Cows produce milk that can be transformed into butter and cheese, while pigs convert scraps into valuable food that will sustain the family through the colder months. Nothing exists without purpose. Even manure, something modern life usually considers waste, becomes one of the farm's most valuable resources, enriching exhausted soil and helping ensure that next year's crops will grow successfully. The idea of throwing useful materials away would seem almost incomprehensible here. Broken tools are repaired, worn clothing is patched repeatedly, leftover fabric becomes quilts, damaged barrels are rebuilt, and even ashes from the fireplace find new life in household tasks ranging from cleaning to soap making. Imagine living in a world where almost everything surrounding you has already served several different purposes before reaching your hands. Instead of asking what should be discarded, you would naturally ask what it could become next. Inside a nearby shed, seeds from the previous harvest are stored with extraordinary care. Their value extends far beyond the coming spring because each small handful carries the promise of future harvests, making careful storage one of the most important responsibilities on the entire farm. Weather is the silent partner in every decision. A damp season may spoil grain before it can be safely stored. An early frost may destroy crops still standing in the fields, and a long drought can undo months of patient work despite everyone's best efforts. This constant uncertainty teaches lessons that cannot easily be learned elsewhere. Patience becomes second nature, careful planning replaces unnecessary risk, and gratitude follows every successful harvest because no family believes prosperity is guaranteed from one year to the next. Looking across the property once more, you realize that nothing here operates independently. Every chore completed before breakfast supports another task waiting in the afternoon. Every season prepares for the next, and every generation quietly inherits knowledge gathered through decades of observation and experience. The longer you remain in this world, the more one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Colonial America is not held together by remarkable inventions or endless convenience, but by countless invisible connections between people, animals, tools, land, and time itself. Understanding those connections is perhaps the closest you can come to understanding how ordinary families transformed a difficult landscape into homes that would support generations yet to come. As the seasons pass, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Time is measured differently in 1776. It is not divided by calendars filled with appointments or clocks marking every passing minute, but by the first frost, the return of migrating birds, the height of growing corn, the ripening of orchards, and the slow shortening of autumn days that quietly announce another winter is approaching. Every season brings an entirely new set of responsibilities. Spring belongs to planting, summer to constant maintenance, autumn to harvesting and preserving, while winter becomes a test of preparation, where every decision made during the warmer months determines whether the family faces comfort or hardship before the snow finally melts. No one expects life to become easier simply because the weather changes. Instead, each season replaces one demanding task with another, creating an endless cycle where survival depends not on working harder during a single month, but on maintaining steady effort throughout the entire year. When autumn arrives in full, preserving food becomes almost as important as growing it. Vegetables are carefully stored in cool cellars beneath the house. Apples are dried for the months ahead. Meat is salted or smoked above slow-burning fires, and herbs gathered during summer are hung from wooden beams to dry before the first heavy snowfall arrives. Every preserved jar, every sack of grain, and every bundle of dried herbs represents insurance against an uncertain future. There is no nearby supermarket waiting to replace spoiled supplies, no delivery wagon arriving with fresh food after a difficult week, and no simple solution if careful planning gives way to carelessness. Would you look at your pantry differently if it determined whether your family could eat until spring? Suddenly, every loaf of bread, every smoked ham, and every basket of potatoes becomes far more than food. It becomes peace of mind carried through the longest months of the year. Winter transforms the countryside completely. The fields that demanded endless labor only weeks before now rest beneath frost and snow, while daily life shifts closer to the warmth of the fireplace, where repairing tools, spinning wool, sewing clothing, and preparing for another growing season quietly replace many of the chores once performed outdoors. Even during these quieter months, idleness remains a rare luxury. Someone is always mending harnesses, sharpening blades, weaving cloth, carving wooden utensils, or repairing furniture worn by years of constant use, ensuring that nothing valuable enters the new season neglected or broken. Looking around the farmhouse, you begin to understand that every object tells a story stretching far beyond the present moment. The table has served several generations. The iron kettle may have cooked thousands of meals, and the blanket resting across your shoulders could easily have begun as wool gathered from sheep raised on this very farm years earlier. The passing of time leaves its mark on people just as surely as it does on the land. Children slowly become skilled workers, parents become teachers, and grandparents transform into living libraries whose greatest contribution is no longer measured by physical strength, but by the experience they quietly share before it disappears forever. Knowledge is one of the few possessions that grows more valuable every time it is passed to someone else. A lesson about planting before the last frost, recognizing the first signs of illness in livestock, or repairing a cracked wagon may one day save a family's harvest, proving that wisdom often becomes the most important inheritance of all. Standing once more beneath the open sky, you realize that life in colonial America is not defined by constant hardship alone. It is equally defined by preparation, patience, adaptability, and an extraordinary ability to build stability in a world where certainty is always just beyond reach. And perhaps that is why these ordinary families, whose names have largely been forgotten, left behind a legacy far greater than they could ever have imagined. One carefully tended season, one shared lesson, and one ordinary day at a time. The more time you spend in this world, the more you realize that the passing of the seasons shapes not only the land but the people themselves. Every year leaves behind new experience. Every harvest teaches another lesson, and every winter reminds the community that survival has never been guaranteed. It has always been earned through preparation, patience, and the willingness to adapt. As families grow older, responsibilities quietly shift from one generation to the next. Children who once followed their parents through the fields now make decisions of their own, while older hands gradually step back from the heaviest labor, offering something equally valuable in return: judgment built from decades of successes, failures, and seasons that refuse to unfold as expected. There is no formal ceremony marking these changes. One day, a young man realizes he is guiding the plow instead of walking behind his father. A daughter who once learned to preserve vegetables now teaches the same careful methods to her younger siblings. Life moves forward so naturally that no one pauses to announce the moment when a student quietly becomes a teacher. These lessons are rarely spoken as long lectures. They appear in small corrections made while repairing a fence, in quiet advice shared during planting, or in a simple warning offered before the first frost arrives. Knowledge grows through observation, repetition, and trust, becoming part of daily life until it is almost impossible to separate education from ordinary work. Imagine learning nearly every practical skill without a classroom, a textbook, or written instructions. Instead, every mistake becomes a lesson witnessed firsthand. Every success strengthens your confidence, and every experienced neighbor becomes another source of knowledge that no library could fully replace. The passing of the years also changes the community itself. New families arrive seeking opportunity. Children establish homes of their own. Barns are raised where forests once stood, and rough paths slowly become familiar roads connecting settlements that continue growing one season at a time. Not every year brings prosperity. Storms flatten crops, disease spreads through livestock, drought hardens the fields, and unusually harsh winters test even the best-prepared households. Yet each challenge leaves behind hard-earned experience, making the next generation slightly wiser than the last. This quiet resilience becomes one of the defining qualities of colonial life. People cannot control the weather, the changing seasons, or the uncertainty of the future, but they can control how carefully they prepare, how willingly they help one another, and how faithfully they continue their work despite setbacks that might discourage others. Would you measure success differently if it depended less on wealth and more on whether your family reached another spring healthy, well-fed, and hopeful? In a world where survival itself is never taken for granted, even an ordinary year without disaster becomes something worth celebrating. As evening settles once again across the countryside, smoke rises gently from chimneys scattered across the landscape. Behind each one, another family gathers around a familiar fire, sharing food, exchanging stories, planning tomorrow's work, and unknowingly contributing another quiet chapter to a history that will rarely remember their names individually. Yet taken together, their lives form something extraordinary. Every field they cleared, every home they built, every child they raised, every lesson they passed on, and every difficult season they endured became part of a foundation upon which future generations would continue building. The great events remembered in history could never have happened without these countless ordinary people whose greatest achievement was simply meeting each new day with determination, wisdom, and hope. The longer you remain in this imagined journey, the easier it becomes to understand that history is not made only of great victories or dramatic turning points. It is built from ordinary mornings, familiar faces, and countless quiet decisions repeated so consistently that they almost disappear from memory, even though they shape the future more than anyone realizes at the time. Take a slow walk beyond the edge of the farm, and the landscape begins to reveal the marks left by generations of determined hands. Trees have been cleared one by one to create fields. Stone walls have been patiently assembled from rocks gathered during endless seasons of plowing, and narrow footpaths have gradually become dependable roads simply because thousands of people walked the same route before you. Each improvement tells the story of time invested rather than time saved. A fence standing beside the road did not appear in a single afternoon, nor did the orchard begin producing fruit the year it was planted. Everything around you reflects a willingness to work today for rewards that may not fully arrive until many years into the future. That way of thinking quietly transforms an entire society. Families plant trees knowing their children will harvest the fruit, repair buildings that may outlive them by generations, and teach practical skills without expecting recognition, trusting that what they pass forward will continue long after they are gone. Would your choices change if you measured success not by what could be accomplished this week, but by what might still benefit your family 20 or 30 years from now? In 1776, that long view is not considered extraordinary wisdom. It is simply the natural consequence of living close to the land. The countryside itself reflects this patient relationship with time. Fields expand gradually instead of overnight. Homes grow room by room as families increase, and communities strengthen through years of shared work rather than sudden prosperity. Progress exists, but it moves at the pace of human hands instead of machines. As you continue along the quiet road, you notice how little separates people from the natural world surrounding them. The changing wind suggests tomorrow's weather, birds reveal the shifting seasons, and the condition of streams, trees, and soil quietly influences decisions that will affect the household for months to come. Nothing here feels disconnected. The forest supplies timber, the fields provide grain, the animals support the family cares for the land, and the land, in return, determines whether another year will bring abundance or hardship. It is a relationship built on constant observation rather than control. Perhaps that is one of the greatest differences between this world and your own. Instead of trying to master nature, people living here spend their lives learning to understand it, adjusting their expectations to its rhythms rather than expecting those rhythms to adjust to them. Standing once more beneath the wide colonial sky, you begin to see the 18th century with different eyes. It is no longer simply a distant period filled with famous names and historic events, but a living world sustained by ordinary people whose patience, resilience, and quiet determination became the unseen foundation upon which the future would slowly be built. One sunrise, one season, and one generation at a time.